Duggar emergency. Jessa's newborn in ICU as Jim Bob breaks down. A family's silent battle for one tiny heartbeat. Tonight's story isn't just another chapter in the Duggar family's legacy. It's the one that could change everything. At exactly 10:17 p.m., a single phone call shattered the stillness inside the Duggar household and launched a night of desperation, prayer, and unimaginable fear. What happened next would bring the patriarch of America's most watched family to his knees. Jim Bob Duggar, once the unwavering voice of faith and structure, now speechless and trembling in the hallway of a children's ICU. As the life of Jessa Duggar's newborn daughter hangs by a thread, we take you inside the raw, unfiltered moments that the world was never meant to see. No cameras, no scripts, just one family, stripped of all spotlight, begging for one more day with a child they're terrified to lose. This isn't just a crisis. It's a reckoning of love, faith, and everything that even the strongest families can't control. Stay with us, because what happens next will shake you to the core. When the phone rang at 10:17 p.m., Jim Bob Duggar was in the middle of his usual nightly routine. Bible open, prayer list in hand, the house unusually quiet for once. The days of managing 19 children had faded into a rhythm of reflective evenings and measured conversations with his adult children. But this night would rip through all that calm like a lightning bolt. The voice on the other end was trembling. It was Ben. Short, clipped words. Jessa's at the hospital. It's the baby. It's serious. ICU. Jim Bob froze. He didn't speak. His eyes, once sharp with purpose and conviction, went glassy in a matter of seconds. He clutched the phone tighter, as if by gripping it, he could stop time from advancing. A soft thud followed. Michelle, who had been sitting nearby knitting a baby blanket for Joanna's newborn, dropped her yarn and looked up. Something in her husband's face made her blood run cold. "She's not breathing right," Ben continued. "They think it might be cardiac. They're working on her now. Jessa is barely holding it together." The words crashed through Jim Bob's chest. It was not just shock. It was helplessness, devastation, and the kind of paternal grief he had never known. His heart didn't just drop. It splintered. In the Duggar family legacy, moments of trial had come before. From public scrutiny to internal fractures, Jim Bob had often been the central force trying to maintain composure. But nothing prepared him for hearing that one of his grandchildren, a child he had cradled in his arms just weeks ago, was now lying beneath a web of wires, struggling to stay alive. He didn't remember moving. Michelle had to help him to the car. He fumbled with the keys, his usually decisive hands shaking uncontrollably. The drive to the hospital in Springdale was a blur of silence, interrupted only by whispered prayers from Michelle in the passenger seat. At the hospital's emergency entrance, they were met by Jill, already pale with worry, standing by the security desk. "She's upstairs. Room 203. Pediatric intensive," Jill said softly, but her voice cracked with the weight of her own panic. When Jim Bob reached the hallway outside the room, he paused. Through the small rectangular window in the door, he saw Jessa, her shoulders hunched, head bowed over the plastic crib, her body unmoving except for the occasional rise and fall of her chest. Ben stood behind her, one hand resting on her back. The monitors beeped in rhythmic flashes, indifferent to the ache in the room. Jim Bob didn't step inside immediately. He couldn't. For the first time since becoming a father over 3 decades ago, he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to fix it. He leaned against the wall and slid down slowly, his hands covering his face. Michelle knelt beside him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. And in that moment, the man who had once stood as the pillar of a family of 21 cried silently, his whole body trembling. He later said, quietly, to a chaplain, that it felt like his heart had cracked wide open, not just from fear, but from a deep realization that all the values he had spent years upholding, protection, provision, faith, couldn't guarantee health or safety for this tiny soul. Inside the room, Jessa's world had shrunk down to the size of her daughter's face. The nurses and specialists spoke in terms she couldn't fully process: oxygen saturation, congenital defect, ventricular strain. She nodded, but nothing stuck. All she saw was her baby's pale skin, her barely there movements, the tiny chest rising in frantic little spasms. Jessa had given birth just 5 weeks ago. The baby had been fine, or so they thought. A few nights ago, she'd grown lethargic. Then came the breathing issues, then the emergency call, and now this. Jill joined them in the room moments later and instinctively wrapped an arm around her sister. Jill's background as a certified midwife gave her more context for the jargon, but her heart, too, was overwhelmed. "I've delivered over 50 babies," she whispered to Ben, "and I've never seen a situation hit this close to home." Doctors came and went. Some offered hope, others cautious neutrality. A specialist from Little Rock was being consulted. An ICU transfer was on standby. They were doing everything they could. But no one promised recovery. No one could. Jim Bob finally entered the room just after midnight. He approached the crib like a man crossing a frozen lake, each step calculated, hesitant. He looked down at the baby, his granddaughter, his hands trembling as he reached toward her. "You're a fighter, little one," he whispered. "We're not going anywhere." Ben looked up from a corner chair, his eyes swollen from hours of silent sobbing. Jessa turned, her face tear-streaked but focused. For a brief moment, there was nothing to say. Jim Bob laid a hand on her shoulder and she collapsed into his arms. And that was the moment, the unspeakable, deeply human moment, when fear, love, and raw family strength collided. Back at home, news had started to trickle in among the rest of the Duggar siblings. Joy-Anna had to stop breastfeeding her newborn because she couldn't stop crying long enough to settle the baby. Jijidia and Jeremiah arrived at the hospital by dawn. Josia texted scripture verses from across the state. Jinger, thousands of miles away in Los Angeles, stayed up all night on video calls, praying over the phone with Ben's parents. By the following morning, the hospital waiting area looked like a Duggar reunion, but without the laughter. Even Jim Bob, who had so often led in prayer and planning, couldn't muster more than a few words. His focus was fixed. Every beep from the machines inside the PICU sliced the silence like a blade. By day 3, some signs of stabilization appeared. The oxygen levels rose. The heartbeat strengthened slightly. Doctors introduced cautious words. Improvement, responding, tentative optimism. But the family dared not celebrate. Jessa finally stepped out for the first time in days to take a short walk around the building. She clutched her phone, not because of calls, but for the photo of her daughter she kept staring at, when she had been home, cooing, alive and full of softness. "She has my nose and Ben's eyes," she told a nurse once, more to remind herself than to inform. Jim Bob and Michelle alternated shifts sitting in the hallway, praying, whispering to nurses, and offering coffee or water to anyone who stopped by. They did not post on social media. They did not release statements. There were no declarations or distractions, just waiting. And in that waiting, something shifted. For all the Duggars' public history, televised birthdays, engagements, courtships, this moment was raw and private. And it showed a different face of the family, not scripted, not idealized, but human, broken, vulnerable, praying with everything they had. By the end of the week, a turning point arrived. The baby opened her eyes, briefly and only once, but it was enough to send ripples of hope through the room. The heart monitor displayed more regular patterns. A specialist declared that if improvements continued over the next 48 hours, she might be able to breathe on her own. Jessa fell to her knees next to the crib. Jim Bob stepped out into the hallway, phone in hand, and finally called a longtime pastor friend. "She's not out of the woods yet," he said, "but she's still with us, and that means everything." No one knows how the full story will end. The baby's name has not been made public, and no photographs have surfaced. But inside that hospital room in Northwest Arkansas, the Duggars, often a family symbolized by order and public image, have laid all that aside. For now, they are simply a family holding their breath together, waiting for one small heartbeat to carry them into tomorrow. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more exciting videos coming up next.